All right. So thanks for joining us, Celene. I'm Alexis Wagner. I'm the marketing and education director for Westar, and I'm talking to Celene Lillie, who is one of our Westar scholars. And so, Celene, I will let you kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about some of your work and what you've been up to recently.
Hey, Alexis, thanks so much for having me. So my name is Celene Lillie. I am kind of a recent PhD in terms of how Westar goes. I've been out of my program for just about 2.5 years and have been a fellow that entire time. And I kind of split my life between the academy and the church. And I am a director of adult education and spiritual formation at a progressive church in Boulder, Colorado. And I also adjunct at the University of Colorado, Boulder. I primarily work kind of in a wide range of New Testament studies with interests around gender, trauma, violence, and am particularly interested between the intersections between sexual violence and colonization.
Mm.
And along with the New Testament, really pay attention to New Testament texts, but along with that, this breadth of early Christian literature, particularly things from Nag Hammadi, some of the people, early church leaders, other extra-canonical texts that are not found in the New Testament, to really think about diversity in early Christianity and the range of ways in which these folks in the first, second, third generations after Jesus are using the Jesus story, whether it's the teachings, the death, the resurrection, to kind of think about their own contemporary issues during that time, and then kind of to use that as a launching point for thinking about issues that we find ourselves addressing in the contemporary world as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you do a lot of our Jesus Seminar on the Road events where we go around to different locations and churches and kind of talk about stuff. And so obviously I think your work resonates with a lot of people. What are some of your favorite comparisons or contrasts, I guess, to draw from some of that work from early Christian history and some of the diversity found there to some of our contexts and situations today?
So my major my dissertation work and my monograph are actually on a few extra canonical texts from the Nag Hammadi library, and the title is "The Rape of Eve," and these are really dealing kind of with this issue of sexual violence and colonization. And one of the things that I think is so interesting kind of about this work in particular, that it tells this different story of Eve, where so much of the time in the ancient world, women are, I shouldn't say so much of the time, pretty much 100% of the time in the ancient world, women who have experienced sexual violence, and that probably extends to anybody who's experienced sexual violence in the ancient world, men, slaves, any of these kind of categories of folks who aren't male Roman citizens, are shamed. And it's basically to kind of put people in a particular position. And it all kind of centers around questions of power. Who's in charge? Who's in charge? Where does the power lie? Who's in control? And what's really fascinating to me is that, and then how these texts really intersect with questions of colonization in the ancient world. And especially with the advent of Me Too, it's really been interesting to watch over the last, 10 plus years that I've been working on this project, to look at the way that Western society in particular is coming into consciousness around questions of sexual violence, the advent of Me Too, the way in which different incidents have made their way into the mass media in entirely new ways than they would have 20 years ago. Even with most recently that Senate hearings around the Kavanaugh confirmation, and the ways in which these conversations about rape culture, about what have been the dominant paradigms in our society for millennia, but really, really only came to consciousness in the 70s with the Brown Millers Against Our Will, and really connecting sexual violence instead of connecting it with passion and desire, really connecting it with power, that there are these ancient texts that are kind of addressing that. So that's one area that I think is really interesting. The other thing that I'm really working on right now are within this kind of question of diversity is, instead of looking at these ancient texts as, and I'll be actually talking about this in a couple weeks at Westar, and this does come up again and again when I'm on the road, but instead of these ancient texts being prescriptive for how we should be living our lives in particular ways, what I really think they're pointing us to is this mass of creativity that existed in these early communities, and using actually that creativity as our own inspiration for being able to come up with new, innovative answers to our very complex contemporary problems, and using the ancient world, the modern world, everything in between as resources instead of things that are supposed to be. And I guess this is kind of a back way of saying this, but people, a lot of times when I travel around the country, they're really looking for answers. I think the problems that we find ourselves facing, everything from climate change to these questions of sexual violence to economic injustice and inequality, they seem so big. And I think a lot of the time we want to know the answers. What do we do? And these texts point to this place where what they're really saying is what we need to do is come together as communities and talk about it together. And our strength is actually in how we reach out to one another and use our collective wisdom to move forward. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. And yes, you're right. You're always on the road with us. So in a couple of weeks, you'll be having another opportunity to explore a little bit more. So kind of with that, turning to the Westar focus a little bit, what has been kind of your reason for becoming a part of Westar, and what has been your experience and what you've been able to contribute and take away from the organization as a whole, and those sorts of things?
So Westar, I mean, just to be totally transparent about this, Hal Tausig, who was one of the founding members of the Jesus Seminar, was my he was my New Testament 101 professor my first year in seminary, and then became my doctoral advisor. So I had been really familiar kind of with his work with Westar, with a bunch of the other scholars who are a part of Westar, and this question of the historical Jesus was always one that was intriguing to me. And I probably should also admit this, is that this is not really my question. The questions about, who the historical Jesus was aren't really my questions, but I think they're really important questions. And I think they open up opportunities to think about the nascent Jesus movement in really different ways, and the methods used by the Jesus Seminar in terms of this, and the questions that they're asking are really things that I've taken up in my own work. So when I finished and was kind of encouraged to become a part of Westar, I jumped on the opportunity. I had no clue kind of that I'd be doing as many things with them as I am now, particularly kind of on the road. And as Alexis and I joke about this, I guess, I'm this fall, I'm actually out, I think it's like 6 times in 8 or 9 weeks that I'm actually out. So it's a lot. It's a lot of weekends in a row. But I guess kind of going back to the fellows, one of the things that I found, particularly with the fellows, is that I find a collegiality there that I haven't found in other places in the academy, that we can really vehemently disagree with one another, and then go hang out after a session and just be human beings, and learn from one another, and be creative with one another. And it's this such a collegial atmosphere that it's been a wonderful model for me for thinking about, what do I want the groups that I'm a part of to look like? And Westar has really, really provided that. I think the other thing that's so important is this intersection between the academy and the public. Is where else are you going to have this opportunity for real interaction, and real interaction for scholars between the academy and the public, and for the public to have access to scholarship in this way. And I just think that this is so unique. And for me, and I would say mostly, more so even, this comes on, I find this on the road, which is such a lovely thing. So we go out kind of like Noah on the Ark 2 by 2, or the early Jesus people, go out 2 by 2, to new communities. And if they don't like us, we shake off the dust from our feet. That rarely happens.
Yeah.
But that it's this really interesting opportunity to hear what people beyond Westar, beyond the academy are thinking. And I find it a really fruitful place that stretches my scholarship, where I get new ideas from folks. And it is just, it's a real privilege to get to not, to get to present certain things to the public that they might not necessarily have an opportunity to hear otherwise. But the real privilege comes from hearing their questions and comments, and the ways in which this material relates to their own lives, and then how this also becomes just another way that our scholarship gets stretched. And I can't overemphasize the benefit for my own work in getting to hear voices of people that I never would have had the opportunity to hear otherwise.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. I think that's Westar at its best too, right? Like that give and take, and getting the word out to others, but also being influenced by the culture and by the community and as well. So well said. Well, thanks, Celene. And I know you have a lot going on. I don't want to keep you from any of that prep work for those 6 out of 9 weekends coming up. So I will say thank you and let you go, but it's been great to chat with you.
Thanks so much, Alexis. Take care.
Thank you.